Oh, that works. Okay, great. So, so we're starting our recording because now we're going to talk a little bit about the class that we're going to learn together. And with everybody's permission today, I have a meeting that actually started at noon. I've indicated that I'm coming later, but I'm going to need to finish a couple minutes early today. So what I thought we'd do is for our introductory class, which will be enough, it's like 11:15, so we'll go for a little bit more than an hour today, and we'll end a little bit earlier than normal, and I'll try not to go past 12:30, Linda, in future, to make it up in future. So sometimes we would get into really great conversations, and the time started to ripen and on the vine, and it was a little too much. So we'll make sure that we are devoted to our time commitment here from beginning to end. So I want to start with a question, and it really is the question for us in the course. What is a question? And I passed out the syllabus. Anybody want an extra copy of the syllabus? I have a few copies of it, so I'm going to pass it around for anybody who wants. And
can you pass it through the computer?
Yeah, right. And it's there. It's, if you really wanted to look at it, the only reason that I'm passing it out is so that you could have another piece of paper. But on it, you see that our first topic today is to really understand what is a question. So I want us to spend a little bit of time going deeply into that idea. Is that an extra one, or is this one just, it was one of the wet ones?
Did you have one?
Yeah, I have more. So to start us off, I will actually quote Linda, who, that's okay, that's good. Yeah, I have another one in there. Linda, who sent me a little answer to her question. Do you remember doing this, Linda? Yeah, I loved it because I read it and I was like, what is this? And then I understood, because she knew that the first class, in case she missed it, would be this thing. So she wrote, a question is a sentence that opens the door to gather information or knowledge. Okay, so that is your definition. You might have changed it, and if you have something to say, you'll add to it. So what is a question? What is a question? It's a kind of like an ironic thing. It's a question about a question. But when you think of questions, what is it that, why do you use them? What is it that you're hoping to accomplish? Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, a question would be to find out an answer of which I do not know.
Mm-hmm. So, right. So it is seeking knowledge, undiscovered or not yet discovered knowledge. Fantastic. What else?
It could be just information, not knowledge.
Okay. So a question is to acquire information, kind of like what Linda was saying. Okay.
How do you get there?
Okay. So like I said, I want to study this deeply. So the question is the vehicle to get to information, or is it the prompt to get information? You understand where I'm trying to get a little bit?
I understand the distinction between the
Say,
vehicle.
what's the difference between?
No, they are pretty much the same. What I'm trying to understand is if information is something that requires a question in order to acquire it.
Well, I have a lot of friends who give unsolicited advice, so no.
Yes, right? So that's not always the case. So what I'm curious about is how is a question the prompt, the vehicle for information, other than either unsolicited advice or a declaration when somebody just says, here's the thing. Part of it is what Barbara's saying is usually it's a prompt by somebody who's seeking the knowledge, right? Whereas unsolicited advice, you may not have been asking for it, but it's come to you.
Right, but I think that I was trying to make, besides being silly, I was trying to make the distinction between knowledge and information, because I think they're different. So Barbara's response was to gain knowledge, and I was saying another definition of a question is to get information. Right. And I guess the line is pretty thin, but how to get direction somewhere is different than tell me something different about your family.
Exactly. And I think we have to spend some time distinguishing between the question of how do you get to Gelson's, okay, which is, that's a question. How do you get to Gelson's? Well, you turn left here, and then you turn right there, and then you turn left here, and then you turn left there, and that's how you get to the, and it's simply information. And then there's that other element, which is there's something else behind the question. Maybe it's, what are you going to get at Gelson's? Why do you want to go to Gelson's? What is the outcome of me giving you the information to get to Gelson's, which can sometimes be a part of the question itself, right? And Jewish parents are really good at this, right? Like if you ask a question, Jews are notorious for this, right? Like, say, how do I get to Gelson's? Well, why are you asking, right? Like, what do you mean? I just need to go to Gelson's. Even if I have a reason, I don't need it for us to have that conversation about it. So there's something about the exchange that makes this tool of literary, a literary tool, a language, a use of language that is more unique than just information. That's what I was trying to get at. Yeah.
I was thinking that from this discussion, it sounds like the question is very personal, meaning that if you're the one seeking, asking the question, you're asking for your own personal reason, not necessarily on behalf of the whole group. It can be that, but it sounds like it's more personal than just acquiring information, which you can get anywhere. You can turn on the television, it filters in of some sort. But if you're actually asking a question, then it's personal. And then if you get knowledge, the question is, what are you doing with the information and the knowledge?
Yeah.
Is that something you're doing to actually change something about yourself? Is it just enriching your life? It's got a lot of levels on that.
I think that's a really important addition to this, is who is asking.
Mhm.
Because if you need to go to Gelson's, to use our example ad nauseum, right? All you got to do is plug it into the Google Maps. And when you're asking Google Maps, are you asking a question? Well, yeah, you are, because it's a it's a prompt, right? It's an inquiry, it's a query for a specific set of information. But when you're talking about who's asking on behalf of somebody, all of a sudden, right? The agency of you become involved in some way. Roberta.
Also, I think sometimes you ask questions not really to get information. You ask questions so that the other person you're asking can do the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really an exchange. It's
Yeah.
for that person to try to figure out,
Right, a rhetorical question,
Mhm.
right? So you ask a question, it's absolutely a question, but it's really about evoking some kind of response.
or thinking.
Right, with your children, this is the great example, right? Did you do that? Right? Like, of course, you as the parent, you knew, because you either saw it or you were in the room, and but to get the child to take some responsibility for that is an important tool of relationship building, but also like a personal responsibility. So that's when we ask questions sometimes, even though we know the answers to them, because we're hoping that the other person will participate in the knowledge that we have. Yeah. No, it's fine. Yeah, go ahead.
Sometimes you're asking for an opinion. Like I've asked Sherry to recommend an internist to me,
Mhm.
and you want the information from them.
Yeah, that's great, right? And when you want an opinion, the reason why you would ask Sherry, I mean, she's an expert,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So she has a certain accumulated, she's a nurse by trade, but also has probably dealt with medical professionals really well. I know. So, yeah. By being able to solicit information from people who have knowledge, there's an implication of trust that you don't just ask the person on the street, do you know a good internist? You could, right? You might even get the same answer. Yeah, you might even get the same
You just
answer,
gave me an answer.
right? But the likelihood that you're going to get the best possible information from the expert is greater when you ask that question. Fantastic, right?
And
Anybody else?
along with what Roberta said, the question that's in my mind, I don't mean this to sound silly, is a question that you might ask a child, like, is that what you're wearing?
Yeah. Right. Oh my God. Right. Exactly. That's the same thing. Did you do that? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, now that's a kind of an insidious question, right? Did you guys get that right? That's like a, is that what you're wearing? Meaning that like, what I really want to say to you is, I don't think that matches, right? But I didn't say that because I want you to discover that it doesn't match. So I'm asking in a way for you to kind of come, which kind of like what Roberta was saying before, but it's even more demonstrative of your opinion, point of view, your knowledge that is having influence. And when we talk, we're going to talk about one of the very famous questions in the Torah that is all about that. That's all about knowledge and taking some kind of responsibility for the behavior that is lacking in the moment. Jeannie, what do you want to say?
I don't, I don't know if you want to go there, but I think a lot about people who ask questions for sometimes because they want the audience or the person answering to look small, to put them on a spot,
Yeah.
just to let everybody know how much they know versus how much they're not. Maybe it's not really sincerely a question, but a platform for them to expound on their own beliefs.
Well, isn't that a great thing? You said that a question may not really be a question, right? Because if it's asked with a specific intent to belittle or to demean or to diminish the other, then something is lost in that exchange. Case in point, this was so great. So I said, my kid got into college and he went to some of these welcoming receptions, and lo and behold, there was the stereotypical super genius student who had to raise their hand and say, so how do you get into the honors classes? How many APs will be, I mean, seriously, right? And everybody was wrinkling their nose because they're like, you're part of an elite group of people that got into this school. I don't think that you have to ask those particular questions, but part of it is a maturity issue, right? And I think that that's another element to it, is that the inquisitor, the person who is asking the question, a definition of a good question implies a certain amount of maturity that you would rely upon, right? So go back to Roberta's question, right? Part of the reason that Sherry's willing to give some good advice to her about a recommendation is because she also feels like the question was asked with a sincerity. So if it was someone who was cavalier and didn't really value the information that was being offered, she might not have answered the question as authentically. Right? Isn't that an interesting thing? When we are asked questions and sometimes we don't want to give the answers that we think people want because maybe it's not the one that we feel that they deserve. That's a really interesting, complicated part of this whole question and answer piece that sometimes we do reflexively, but when we take a few minutes to kind of think about it, we can really understand that there's a power dynamic that's taking place, right? That's the point. There's an exchange of power that comes with that. And that's what I think you were saying, Jeannie.
On the other hand, it's an opportunity if you meet a stranger or you're sitting at a bar mitzvah table and you
Yes.
don't know the person next to you, to engage in them.
Love
Tell me about yourself. Tell me what brings you here. Who do you know? To get them to open up and have a comfortable dialogue with this person so they're no longer a stranger.
Yeah, that's
So
wonderful,
it can be
right?
a warm and welcoming vehicle as well.
Absolutely, right? It's a tool of relationship and connection.
Right.
And sometimes it will be offered as either an exchange of knowledge, right? The relationship can be built on, I have something that you don't have and I would be willing to share it with you. Or it's some kind of let's go discover this together kind of question, right? I wonder what this would be like. And the very act of discovering the truth with this new friend together creates a bond and a relationship that that would not have been created otherwise. And sometimes the question has that kind of influence. Anybody else making a comment on screen, or are you ready to go ahead for a little bit? Okay, good, yeah.
Good.
So it's really interesting. Okay, thanks for offering that. And I think that kind of sensitive reading of what a question is all about was what really prompted me to take on this research of all of the questions in the Torah, which is going to make up a good part of our class and what we're going to be learning in this class together. So today, what we're going to talk about is just on the level, like what are questions and what is interpretation and what are the kinds of questions that show up in the Torah. And then through our class, we're going to really unpack the different themes and the different reasons that questions appear. To me, as I think you read in the introduction, the very notion that this book, which espouses a certain kind of certainty, which implies a certain amount of faith, whether it's about talking snakes and donkeys, or it's fiery bushes that aren't consumed. When you're reading this, you have a hard time. There's a suspension of disbelief, which is a kind of strange, a strange term. But it is this concept that like you have to actually put away your skepticism when you enter into this book so that maybe you can glean a certain amount of the faithfulness that it is intending to convey. But then you understand that there are 275 questions in this book. It's not just simply that you have to overlook the voice that comes from the heavens on top of a mountain and gives 15 tablets in the history of the world part 1 with Mel Brooks, and he walks down the mountain, I have 10 tablets for you, right? Like, all right, so maybe that's a little bit too concrete, but like the idea that this is a book that is trying to communicate something very powerfully about what faith is. If you don't introduce or validate that uncertainty and doubt as a part of that process, you will have a lot of people that, especially in modernity, will just turn and walk the other way, right? I mean, they might go through the suspension of disbelief because they realize the benefits of it are far better than being without it. However, you have to kind of live in some kind of like lie in order to live that way. And a lot of people don't want to live their lives that way. A lot of people don't want to live their lives that way. The statistics play out. So I'm wondering, what would it look like if all of a sudden you have a text that validates it with the very language that it was written with, to help us understand that there's something more to be gained? That was the thesis. And that's what I hope that we're going to accomplish in the class. Okay, so let's jump in. Any comments or reflections so far? Yeah.
In all of these 275 questions, are they equally divided throughout? Are they more in certain sections?
Yes, so they are more in certain sections. And if we get to it today, what I thought we would do as a class is that what we'll do is I will bring the comments and the questions that are for the weekly portion. So there are some that have like 20 or 30, okay?
Oh, wow.
And then there are some that have 1. And then there are many that have none. Now, the vast majority have at least 1 question in them, but which is remarkable in and of itself. And then when we get to the parts that don't have questions, I thought that would be a really valuable moment to ask, why aren't there questions here? There's questions everywhere else, right? And you'll notice that when there's a coherence, when there's a lot of focus on questions, that also says something. So from an academic perspective, when you peel away the layers of the text, the questions in them are sometimes either later renderings trying to understand what was happening in that moment, or they're actually questions that come out of the narrative itself, meaning that they're necessary to ask in order to move the story along. And you need to have those questions. So it was a great question. Yes.
In the beginning, does that have a lot of questions?
So that is fantastic question. So in the beginning has no questions. And the first question, which we'll study the question, okay? But the first question is not the one that we think is commonly the question, which is God going to the human beings in the garden and saying, "Where are you?" There's actually one question before that, which is remarkable. So the first 2 chapters of the Torah have no questions in them. And it's in chapter 3 in the beginning when the snake asks the first question of the entirety of the Bible and asks, "Did God really tell you not to eat the fruit that's in the middle of the garden?" Which is so enticing and delectable, right? Like, did God really say that you shouldn't do what you're not going to do, right? And then the snake entices the woman to eat the fruit, right? It's such a really, we'll get to study that, but like, isn't that remarkable? But it's important to know that when you're reading that, the vastness of creation does not have any statement of uncertainty. It does tell you that there's something to have at least a sense of faith about, a sense of certainty about. And that I think makes the Torah very powerful. And even the Albert Einsteins of the world, who did more to understand the nature of the universe better than any other human of their era, the curiosity that they had about the universe is the same curiosity that you'll find in the Bible.
And then it's a leap of faith. If you're gonna.
Right, even if you're a scientist, you have to have a leap of faith to say, my hypothesis is that I'm going to discover that there is a gravitational force that really did create the Big Bang and the expansion of the universe and eventually the contraction of it, creating stars and planets and all that other stuff. Okay, so let's jump in for a little bit. So let's read a little bit. What I'm going to try and do is I'll go back and forth, and we'll have you on this in the screens. You'll read a little bit, and we'll have everybody reading here, okay? And we'll see how that goes. So, who would like to read a little bit from the first part? What is a question? Oh, Alice, that's good. I love that. We have too many to choose from.
All right, then just go
You
around
got it.
and back and forth. These days, even a question meant to get a laugh is flooded by a barrage of complicated relationships, complicated politics, complicated ecology, and a complicated universe. Just try reading a news feed online and you'll have a wild ride through politics of the moment, home and garden tips, investment advice, and the latest celebrity breakup, all before you finish your first cup of coffee or tea. We can use a little more curiosity about the world around us, but we certainly need some better questions.
Go ahead.
With a little attention, we find that the times we ask a good question is a powerful tool for connection with others, even providing deep insights into our own thinking and experience. It seems impossible to find our place in the world without some form of questing, of seeking out the truth that dwells around us.
So the first thing is, this is just, kind of fun to outline like where are questions, and all the more so to think about it contemporarily. Let's talk about it today, right? So there's more curiosity in discovering. There's more potential that we have in our world today than has ever existed before. That's why you might feel that like religion as an expression of communal identity is not as powerful, because it is predicated on a certain kind of certainty, right? There's a certain allegiance, a loyalty that is required of it without question, that people have a very difficult time resonating with or reconciling, because there's so much potential curiosity, change, and things to find out about in the world. But on the same note, there's too much stuff out there. And that is, even, like I said, like I was commenting, if you read the newspaper in the morning, right, the art of reading the newspaper is actually lost on us today, because in our world today, we have these things that are curated to our own interests. We don't even get all the news that's available. And it's important for us to be able to grab little bits and pieces there. But if you were to say, what's the most important thing to talk about today? You might say the war in Ukraine. But then you would say, wait a minute, there's all kinds of other things that are pretty catastrophic, right? You would say there's some changing winds of of the environment. Like that's pretty bad, by the way. There's some serious weather going on in the South right now. That is definitely amplified. My kid's down there, right? Well, that's important, right? So there's all these things that are happening that are so very important, and questions are perhaps the way to mediate between all of the competing forces of knowledge and help us focus in on what's really important. I think that's sort of usually where a question starts. If you care enough to ask a question, that means that you care enough. If you ask a real question, it means that you care enough to have the answer. And that takes some time. Okay. All right. So go on and read a little bit more.
The word question itself is Latin in origin and refers to the act of seeking. In the Hebrew language, to ask a question is also to seek out or to inquire. The question frames an interest in discovering meaning and invites a response. As a basic human need, this curiosity can bring great purpose into our lives. The satisfaction of an answered question, or even the understanding of what a question seeks to answer, is inspiring, wondrous, even divine. In conversations and in teaching, questions are there to evoke a relationship. More than an opportunity to solicit and receive information, a question is posed to communicate a desire to connect to deeper truths and to discover sacred connections.
So just to add before we go on to that, right? Because I think that, what we're trying to discover is, with Linda's definition and even with Barbara and Pam's definition, where it's about knowledge seeking or information exchange, whether you know it or don't know it, this concept that a real question is not just simply about information exchange, but it's about a deeper connection, really does. It does require us to be cognizant of when we ask questions and under what circumstances. And just think about it, right? Like if you're asking somebody, hey, where did you put the such and such in the kitchen, right? So like that's just information. It's not really a question. But if you sit down and you ask, how are you? Right? And that this is a really big thing in our world today, right? Just use the how are you, for example. How many times do you walk around the world and somebody says like, hi, how are the kids? Right? That's a question. But behind it is like, I don't really have time to really want to know what's going on with you. I'm using it as a way to make a connection to you, which is fine. That's sweet and valuable enough. But the question itself isn't really an authentic question. So real questions are the ones that invite a certain set of deeper truth, a desire to connect on a deeper level. And those are the ones that are worthy of attention. And that I think is actually like a really sensitive thing. It actually makes you a wonderful communicator, a great partner in life when you ask the questions of the people that you really care about, friends or partners in life, children, right? Even strangers, if you're looking to meet somebody and you want to create a connection, it's got to go deeper than that. So go ahead and finish this up.
The focus on a question can be playful too. Relationships are built upon the courageous leap to connect. Those moments should be filled with curiosity and joy. Questions can be the dramatization of that connection, bridges of the chasm between doubt and faith, between uncertainty and deep knowledge. And so questions, as an important tool of language, deserve attention.
Okay, great. So far, so good. By the way, this is my stuff. I'll quote it when it comes from somebody else. So if it's not quoted, then it's the stuff that I wrote. So yeah, this is part of the introduction. So you're my guinea pigs. Yeah. So part of it is, right? So what I did is I did a little adaptation, and thank you. Yeah, thank you for reading that. Yeah.
Here's my question. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, anything new?
Yeah.
Should you answer or shouldn't you? Should you just go?
That's a wonderful question. Right? So
because I just bumped into somebody in the market, haven't seen her in 10 years.
Right.
Know her from the elementary school.
Right.
But I occasionally see her in Gelson's. And she said, how are you? And I said, fine.
Yeah.
And I didn't go into, I just got married.
Right.
I didn't because
Not necessary.
like, she doesn't like, does she care? So I didn't tell her.
Yeah.
But should I have?
Yeah. Okay.
May
So
very well have cared.
right.
If
So
I ran into you
Well, I
in
know this
Gelson's and I
one.
hadn't seen you in whatever 10 years.
Who was it?
isn't that amazing? So
like
you're making a judgment call. Absolutely.
I
You're
made
making,
that judgment call not to reveal
Yeah.
what was really going on in my life.
so now
She
upon reflection,
seemed
did you,
like that was enough.
yeah, did you, upon reflection, how did you feel about that?
No, I felt like she just didn't want to talk.
Yeah.
She was like
Doing my thing.
that was just enough for her.
Yeah,
So I didn't share.
it's a
But
powerful
in a
thing.
way, that it's gonna sound funny, that's her loss. Like, I'm fine,
Right,
but I could sense she didn't want it. So you have to be able to, when you're in a communication moment, to be able to gauge what that other person wants to hear or not.
yeah,
What are they really asking? And what do they really want as the answer?
right,
That's part of dealing with people asking questions.
right. I couldn't agree more, is that it's, so I'm gonna hold on to that because I think that that's another piece of this sort of journey, is the feeling behind questions.
Mhm.
So just to put a little pin in it and then come back, it seems impossible to ask a question without some kind of emotion behind it. And I think that's an important piece of this as well, that sometimes is overlooked. And you make a judgment about whether it's an emotional thing or it's an intellectual judgment call that you have of whether the information that you are being asked to exchange or that you're curious about is really worth it. So, great. Any other comments so far? Everybody okay up here? Yep, Lauren?
So, I could see Barbara's, the person she ran into maybe said, oh, I ran into Barbara Annick today. And they said, oh, I heard she just got married. And the person said, what? She just got married? I just ran into her girls and she didn't mention anything. I mean, there's that scenario.
You just made her feel guilty. You just made her feel guilty. She just gave you the Jewish guilt. That was great. No, you're right.
Why did she mention anything?
Right, that's right.
But then again, I remember, what the summer my father passed away. I remember going back to school and people said to me, "How was your summer?" Expecting, oh, it was a great summer. And I said, "Well, my father died." And like they said, they just were asking, and I said, "Well, my father died," and they didn't really, they weren't really listening. And then when they really listened, they said, "Oh my God, your father died. I'm so sorry." So it's like, it's weird.
Yeah.
It was weird.
Exactly, right? Like that's a really great comment, because what Barbara said was in this reflection was she thought that the person that she was speaking to really had enough.
Right.
Now maybe the person would have liked more, but in that moment. So if you see the person again and she says, "I saw you the other day, you didn't tell me to get married," you can simply say, I want you to know that in that moment, we were, it's the passing.
That would be my response.
There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, isn't that also, it's a tool of connection. It's a tool of relationship. It's important that sometimes the questions are very powerful tools, and sometimes they're ones that we want to use and sometimes that we don't want to use. And there's sometimes that we use them when we shouldn't be using them, like how are the kids? I can't tell you how many people ask me that question as if it's like I don't want to. Right. I don't really want to know like about you. I want to, but I want you to feel like I care.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask that kind of question. So it's great. So I appreciate it. Right. But I don't feel obligated by it.
Right.
I have two things to say. One is, Barbara, I would challenge you that what you didn't want to share the information, not that you didn't think she wanted it. I think it's more that you didn't want to give it. I would question whether that might be a possibility. I'm giving you unsolicited advice.
And she said it in a question.
Pam is allowed.
Yeah, that's right.
Actually, anybody at this table
It's good.
through Zoom is allowed to question.
Well, it's wonderful.
I mean, I think I may be
Maybe
I
there's
may be
truth to that.
projecting. I may be projecting because I think if I were you in that situation, I just wouldn't want to share with that person. Period. But
Yeah, I don't think she was saying that you not wanting to share was the wrong decision.
right.
I think she was
I
just
got
saying,
that.
yeah.
I got that.
All right, Judy, what do you want to say? You have to unmute though.
I was gonna say, maybe it was interpreted that way because Barbara really didn't wanna ask her questions and
Yeah.
No, I
pursue
started.
the conversation.
Ah.
Oh, no, I
Oh,
started.
she
with-
didn't. We get. This is so funny. Thank you for giving us. This is like therapy
Yes.
on your grocery shopping. This is so funny.
We don't need to go. with
I
your
know,
subject.
we're so much done. Well, I did say go deep, but like, this
But
is like,
I was
it
the
was
one
great.
that asked first.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
did ask her first.
So I will
And the
say,
response was so
Yeah.
minimal.
yeah,
And then when she responded to
right,
me,
like, what are you
I
gonna do?
figured she doesn't want to engage.
I do
That's why
appreciate
I
it.
did what I did.
I
Makes sense.
appreciate the exercise and I thank you for sharing. And I think it's important for us to understand, especially when we get a little bit more deeply into this, it's not just stuff on the paper. This is not just stuff on the surface, which is going to lead us into the next thing that we're going to read. Any other comments about where we're at right now? Yeah.
I have just one more comment. As my son was getting ready to get married, and I'd run into people at Gelson's or whatever, and they'd say, you know, what's going on? And I would say, oh, Aaron's getting married. Invariably, I would get the question, do you like her?
So crazy,
Yeah.
right?
And I have
That is so
all-
typical of response.
Right.
all the rest of my friends,
Yeah.
Barbara, have daughters,
Uh-huh.
and they don't get that question, do
Yeah.
you like him?
Yeah.
Oh, no, people ask me.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes, they
They
did.
do.
Of both.
Both sides, yeah.
They
Yeah,
do.
they went into great depth about who she was marrying and is that okay? And they asked me about my son all the time.
Yeah.
That's 2 men, so
Yeah.
no, that's not true.
Interesting.
For me, I've got
Sorry.
it.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I get the question for both kids. So that's
Yeah.
interesting. I'm sorry, I was lying down and listening.
It's okay. You're good. You're good.
No, it's
so-
because I'm in my room and it's just not as comfortable to sit.
Nice. Lauren, do you feel like reading?
Sure.
All right, so it's what is interpretation? So here's the next piece. So we know what a question is, right? Question is this kind of it's a quest. It's a search for something. It's more than searching for information. It's a search for connection. That would, I think, would be the sort of simple first level of what a question is. And then you get to interpretation, right? The understanding of the question itself, but also the sort of responses and the variety of responses that it creates. So go ahead, Lauren, why don't you read for us?
What is interpretation? The psalmist asks, who is the one that desires life, loves long years, discovering goodness, answers to this question or questions, invites a kaleidoscope of responses. The good life may have some fundamental elements, but the impression one has of a good life may have good life shifts and deepens over time. More than a variety of responses, a question like this offers in the structure of a question introduces the moral equation. Questions beget more questions, even desirous or deepening the connections with one another. The concept that truth invites, even demands interpretation is a great innovation of Jewish project.
Okay, so just to sort of, unpack that, right? So there's the verse in the Psalms, right? Who's the one who deserves good life? They ask it, right? And it kind of has an answer, but really, like, for those of us that just took the class, right, we understand that the good life is, it's a lot more complex than just simply, following all the rules and having abundant wealth and all that other stuff. Like there's a lot of thought about what means a good life, and that brings a kaleidoscope of interpretation. So it's as much as it is the question itself, it's the idea that a good or a well-placed question also invites a variety of responses that the inquisitor, the person who's asking, and also the recipient or the respondent will have something unique. So, we like, how you doing, right? Fine, right? Well, guess what? That's the most plain vanilla, nondescript response to a question, precisely because that means that there isn't much more to expand beyond that, whether it's a question of time or it's a desire to deepen the connection. Sometimes it really just needs to be a give and take response. But for the most part, a really good question invites a level of interpretation, right? And how you interpret the question and how you respond to it is as important as the thought that goes into asking the question in the first place. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Lauren, you want to continue on?
First readers of the Torah may scratch their heads at a particular dynamics of the text. Talking snakes and donkeys, dream tellers, and the prophets all seemed extraordinary, let alone the text that asks questions of the characters, the readers, and even itself. The interpretive tradition of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, captures this best. Woe to the one that says the Torah can simply relate stories in an extraordinary language, because if it is so, even those times could make the Torah come to explain worldly subjects.
No, from ordinary tales.
Oh,
And even-
ordinary tales, one even nicer than those ordinary tales. If the Torah came to explain worldly subjects, even the rulers of the present world have books or even greater merit. If we could emulate what those stories say and use them to compile such Torah of our own, but really, of all the Torah, all that the Torah says, it holds supernatural truths and sublime secrets.
Thank you. Okay, great. So basically let me unpack it. This is actually a wonderful, wonderful text. It says, if you read the Torah and you think that what it says on the surface is what it's intended to say, you're totally missing the truth, right? Because somebody else could come and write a better book than the one that's been written. That's an important distinction to say. We have this book, it is what it is. And the reason that it is what it is because there's something deeper in what's there. And that I think, for me, as a literature major and a person who has loved studying this now for 25, almost 30 years, right? And still will study it again and again and again and again and never feel like I really know it, is because each and every time I'm looking for some of the deeper secrets that are found within. So the person who looks at this and says, gee, this is just a book about a bunch of, talking donkeys and snakes. It's a bunch of hooey, right? If you look at it and that's all you see, you missed it. But if you look at it and you see there's something very, very powerful to be found within. And there is where I think questions can offer something powerful. You know what? Go ahead, Lauren, just to the top, there's one more line.
Okay, wait, let me get back to it. Okay, one more line. Questions are the doorways to deeper wisdom. Interpretations are the prisons of meaning that emanate. I'm reading in very small print from individuals and communicate seeking truth.
Okay, so in other words, basically, like this, a question is, it's a portal, right? Linda, where's my buddy Linda? Hopefully you're still on screen, right? It's a door, right? Questions are doorways. So, and what they are is that it's the exchange of the question is not the value of the question itself, but it's about the opportunity to get to interpretation. And the interpretation is a prism. So it's like light coming in and refracting out a rainbow. Questions are the diamond or the gem that is used to do the refracting. Okay, and if you can look at the questions and just think about, I hope you guys are as into questions as I am, and that you're walking away going, wow, I never thought that questions were as important as they are, because you realize that it has it can change the world. The questions are the vehicles that change the world. They come with a curiosity. And if you have the curiosity about the world, that's how the world is changed, right? If you look at the world and say, I never knew why is this the way that it is? Well, that's how scientists discover the truth. Yeah.
When you're studying with the chavruta, with one person, do you pick that person for any specific reason? Do you pick the partner that you're going to have?
So, practically, yes, eventually what happens. But what happens is in like in a Beit Midrash, in a study hall, you just go find somebody, right? Or sometimes if if the professor wants people to be partnered up, or the rabbi or whatever, that they'll predetermine who are the groups that are meant to study together. But behind your question is, what is it that you find attractive in somebody else that, and I would hope that what it is that there's something that that person has in knowledge that you want to discover. And only through the exchange of the text and the questions that you ask together are you going to really be able to understand that more deeply, right?
And most of these women who we study with now almost 15 years,
Yeah,
we've become chavruta to each other
exactly. Yeah,
in a
right.
very close relationship.
Yeah, so the word chavruta, which is Aramaic, comes from the word chaver, which means a friend, but it comes from the word chibur, which means connection, right? So your friend is someone with whom you have a connection,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just simply proximity or timing, convenience, right? There's something deeper, bootlegging. Everybody doing okay over there? Linda, did you have something to say? No, you're good. Everybody else okay? All right, let's go on to the next thing. Roberta asked, why did you? Oh, Pam, go ahead.
I'm troubled a little bit
That's good.
by interpretation and truth,
Yes.
because I always use the color thing as an example.
Uh-huh.
You know, we can debate what shade of blue you're wearing,
Right.
but you're not wearing red.
Yes.
And so I mean, there's so much now about our politics,
Yes.
and that has to do with truth,
Yes.
and not truth. I mean, I could give you a gazillion examples. So I'm struggling with interpretation and truth.
So for me personally, that's a wonderful question. And I'm very proud about this project because I feel like a focus on questions is more necessary now in our world today than ever before, because I think that the right questions at the right time, well placed, is what helps us to discover truth. So we can debate the shade of this color, but if you say that it's red and I say that it's blue, we have to have some kind of like questioning dialogue to get through that. And if we can establish enough respect to say, I respect that you know, because 10 other places I've seen you choose the right color. Why would you think that this is red? Well, maybe you have a good answer for that. And maybe you don't. And maybe you have to wait for a friend to show you that what you see is not what you see. And I think that that's so there is a distinction between interpretation and truth. Interpretation, if you will, is the crucial step toward truth. And I would even go so far as to say that the truth that we seek is truth with a capital T, if there is such a thing as absolute truth, and that we are all questing that together. That's our journey, is to find truth. We're climbing the mountain of truth. We discover it in our interpretations when we have friends that we feel comfortable and trust to go along the journey with. We feel like the truth is something that we come to understand when it's almost a biological experience. Like when you know something is true, your body tingles, kind of thing, right? Or when you feel something deeply, it's when all of your brain is telling you this is truth. Now, is that absolute truth? I don't know, right? I don't have to know that. But I do know that the only way I'm going to get to absolute truth is through interpretation, which is only going to be found with an exchange of information with people that I care about. Sure.
Blue person is not going to agree with a red person.
No. Yeah, I mean, like besides politics, right? Yeah. However,
You don't have that conversation.
well, however, there has been the case where that's been, right? So we just happen to be in a time, it's a very contentious time, right? And there's a lot of hurt. So
You have to really trust that.
yeah. Barbara.
Well, I was gonna say, well, maybe if we're asking questions to the people that are gonna give us the answers that are most similar to what we would answer ourselves if we were asked a question, maybe we shouldn't be asking the question of those people.
Right.
Maybe we need to extend and open our circle to include the red people if we're blue, and if you're red, include the blue.
Right.
And maybe that's really the problem now, is that our answers our happy answers here, well, I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I'm making some assumptions. And maybe we need to have people of other color come join and answer the and have us be in more of a dialogue that pushes our questions and answers.
So
I don't mean just here at this table,
Yeah.
or it could be here at this table.
no, it's a really great thing. And out there in the world, you've probably seen it. There's this diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that sounds like, well, let's just be nice for all the people who are minorities. That's not what it is about, right? There is this move and evolution. There's an evolution in our social consciousness that says that we need to make more space, right? And that when we make more space, then the possibility of us understanding truths differently will emerge. Right, but we have to make more space in order to do that. I think that's what your comment is, and to
Yes.
relate back to that, that's a really important piece of this. And I would just sort of advocate even further that the ability to ask a question in which that possibility, to create that possibility, is the desire, that is the vehicle for that greater understanding that you could not otherwise have. I may feel very inclusive, but if I don't have somebody else sitting around the table who doesn't feel included, it feels like I'm just kind of like in my own mind thinking about how wonderfully inclusive I am. And I think that that's a very important piece of this. The problem with that is I don't have anybody to ask the question to, am I being inclusive? Right? That's what I think you're getting. So how do we get to that? So little sermonic moment, right? Because I think that this is very difficult. This is the next class. This is the one that we were like, how do we talk to our kids about Israel? Right? Remember that one, right? How do we have the conversation about the things that are so darn complicated in our world today? The same thing is true here. That what we're trying to create is a place where we feel competent, so that when we encounter people with whom we can ultimately have a conversation that needs to test my boundaries, expand my understanding, reinterpret my truth, okay, and create a new truth, that I have the capacity to do it without it feeling like it's a threat, or I'm betraying any loyalties that I have, right? All of the things that I think put people in positions of defensiveness that would prevent authentic questioning to take place. On the same note, we also have to educate in that. So I would much rather hear in the world, in my estimation, questions of curiosity. And I think we're in such a fast-paced world that people feel like can't ask questions. We don't have time to ask questions, right?
There's definitely no time to listen to the answer.
There's plenty of time for all of this, right?
No,
But I know what you're saying, right? And I'm just gonna say, I think you're right, right? It feels like we don't have time to listen.
We don't want to listen.
Those of
Well,
us,
that's convenient, right? That's our convenience.
those of us that are semi or completely retired have time.
right.
Yeah, feel like you don't have as much time as you want.
It's a choice.
Yeah, right. So it's a choice, it's active, it's willful, and I think, and if you have the time to do it to the best of your ability, seems to me, that's an important piece of this as well. So ideas, but I think that that I would just go back and say it's really great to have learning environments like this, even though they feel like they're echo chambers, because they're not.
Okay.
Right? We're really not. I mean, we're willing to push the boundaries here, right? I, as a teacher, am not just giving you one perspective. You don't know my perspective, because I really feel like as a teacher or as a preacher, it's really not irrelevant. Like it's my job to present the stuff, right? And it's your job to engage with it and test it and to incorporate it in a meaningful way, right? Yeah.
I'm sure we all have friends who are our Facebook friends at one time, who now we realize, because they keep posting hateful and awful things, and you really don't want to discuss anything with them
Yeah.
because you think they have closed minds.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
And they think we post hateful things.
Right, well, actually, Roberta doesn't post, that's the problem. I don't know if you do, but you get the point, right, very little, right? Most of us are what they say lurkers, right? We're voyeurs into the life that other people feel very comfortable, even compelled to espouse their points of view. And because there is no, because it's not the platform to challenge, right? It feels very difficult, but my sense is that it's new still, believe it or not. Guys, it's like not even 15 years old, right? Not even 15 years old. The Facebook and the social media platforms,
Do you guys
right?
remember a couple years ago, Starbucks, I guess it's how it's called, the CEO, he had people writing on the cups, the baristas
Yeah.
to try to a question to engage people,
No.
and especially with like other cultures and whatever.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah. Because you're like, I just want my friggin' cup of coffee. I don't, right? I don't want to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion while I'm sipping my cappuccino, my half calf frothy oat milk extra hot cappuccino, damn it.
How'd you know that's what I am?
I know, it's right. So let's turn to the last page. Okay, everybody go to the last page. And here's why I'm going to go to the last page, because the stuff that's in the middle that we're going to skip over is, if you look at the syllabus, they're actually going to be broken down. This is a sort of surface introduction, but we're going to spend time about the questions that imply doubt, the questions that imply relationships, the questions that inspire faith. Those will be sections of the class that we will study together in depth. But what I wanted to do, this is my experiment, and actually I really want to do this because it's also really great for Passover, which is coming up. So I feel like it's timely, and we're going to do Passover next week too, by the way. I want to think about it, especially because some of you might clean your kitchens for Passover, or some of you don't clean your kitchens, but you know that you're supposed to, somewhere you thought you were supposed to clean your kitchens. So maybe you feel guilt about the fact that you're not cleaning your kitchens. I don't know, whatever your mishigas is with Passover. This is an interesting sort of take on what it is. And it happens to be part of the weekly Torah portion, which is right in the middle of Leviticus. So Barbara, you asked a question. Are there questions evenly spaced? The book of Leviticus, okay, which is, all these rules about sacrifices and stuff like that, has a total of 3 questions in the entire book. 3 questions in the entire book. That's where the majority is absent. And that sort of deserves a lot of attention about why that is, which we'll talk about at another point in time. So anyways, Roberta, are you the reader, or did you read?
I didn't.
Okay, great. Please.
Leviticus 25:20.
No. I want you to go to the last page, Tazria Mitzvah, page 5. Page 5, everybody.
Okay. Purity as a prerequisite of sacred worship exists in most religious traditions. Beyond the social dimensions, hygienic benefits of maintaining a certain form of bodily cleanliness, the book of Leviticus explores the spiritual dimensions of purity. The primary function of laws of purity isn't to exclude an individual from participating in the ritual life of the community if they are not fit to make an offering. Rather, the quest for purity is to enable the individual seeker an unfettered chance to encounter
Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. All right, so yeah, and in the book I refer to God with the 4-letter name. So you can just say God or Adonai, whatever you like to say, right? So first of all, this is the middle of the book Leviticus. Leviticus as a whole has it's called Torah Kohanim in Hebrew, which is it's the law book. A Torah, by the way, is a rule book. Torah is teaching. Torah is not, sometimes we hear it's like a collection of stories, or it's this like thing, right? It's an all-encompassing term, but it's literally the word Torah is all about teaching, and specifically the word Torah is all about it's the same word they use for an archer who is seeking a bullseye target. So to shoot an arrow at the bullseye is the word they use, same word they use for Torah. So basically, this is a book to help you hit the mark, right? And what's a sin? You've heard that before. The sin is to miss the mark. A chet is when you're off the mark, right? It's interesting kind of stuff. So in the middle of the book of Leviticus, which is called the Torah, the rule book for the Kohanim, the priests, it's all about what are the priests supposed to do in order for the people to bring sacrifices. So what do they do when they commit a sin? What do they do when they're thankful? What happens if they're not qualified because they're sick, right? If they're shedding viral load, you don't want them in the community, right? There's a lot of stuff that comes out of this, right? The whole question of alopecia, which is very popular in the news today, comes out of these Torah portions. And my colleagues were writing sermons about, hey, this is something that our people were talking about from a long time before, and they weren't talking about it as it wasn't like a taboo. It wasn't that they wanted people to be excluded. It's all about how do you identify people that have the varieties of needs, right? Joy, sorrow, they're sick, they're questionable about their status. How do they have a place? That's the first opening part of this. And the book of Tazria and Metzora has to deal with, it's really gross. It's all about skin diseases and like bodily emissions and childbirth and like really like, the ickiness of the human body, right? Including baldness, which they didn't really know about before. They thought like if a person goes bald, like did that mean that they were like, cursed or something, right? Because they didn't know that stuff. Yeah, that's right.
Where is this from?
Well, I'm sorry?
What is this from?
The book of Leviticus.
This week?
Yeah, it's this week's Torah portion. Yeah. So, all right. So go ahead and read a little bit more now.
We also learned from the outline for individual impurities, childbirth, menstruation, or unusual baldness, then communal impurities, leprosy, or other communicable diseases, and ultimately social impurities, forbidden relationships. Do not elicit questions of clarification or uncertain definitions of what qualifies a person or what disqualifies a person from participating in sacrificial worship. There is a presumption here that the experience of separation is a precursor to the closeness, even intimacy found when a good question is shared. The notion that our connection with the divine is best expressed in a purified form also suggests that the most authentic questions are asked with a similar purity of heart.
So just in short, basically, why are there no questions in this part of the Torah? I would submit that because it's all about all the things that prevent us from asking good questions, right? So if you're sick, just think about it. You've been sick, you ask good questions when you're sick, it's really hard, right? If you are really like overburdened with your own kind of disease, right? If you feel like you have some kind of like social limitation, yeah, it's going to be really hard.
When you have a nurse friend.
That's right. And you find a good internist. Did you hear that, everybody? Except when you have a nurse friend? Okay, good. All right. So go ahead, please.
The concept of impurity connotes a negative state of being. Impurity as a separating force for divine encounter is laden with a rejection by God that isn't really present. The Torah takes great pain to outline the potentially disqualifying states of impurity so that the record can also prescribe the remedy. After thousands of years of studying the culture of worship that no longer exists in practice, seeking purity to encounter God is a necessary dimension of religious continuity. The limits of our physicality may have expanded and contracted throughout the ages, but the commitment to stand unimpeded before some greater or ultimate source of light is affirmative. Indeed, it is the highest form of spiritual quest. Judaism's ability to record and perpetuate the concern for purity in these chapters deserves attention, despite the absence of questions along the way.
Great. So just to, again, reaffirming, why are there no questions here? Because they're dealing with all of the things that disqualify you from asking a good question, right? And the sacrificial concept is about trying to connect with God, but there is another way that, you know, we don't do sacrifices anymore in our day. So why do we still hold this record? Is because that act is also the act that might also prompt you to say, oh, by the way, God, you know, you might want to ask God a question, whether it's a sort of like, you know, how can I be a more faithful servant, or you know, can you help bring healing to my loved ones, which we all know is not something that comes from divine influence, but it certainly comes from our act. We have to ask for it, because that will help us, that will enable us to find the people that will bring the healing, that kind of question. So this concept that we have purity as a standard is something that I think people feel really uncomfortable with, because they're like, you know, I mean, who defines purity and impurity, right? Especially in our world, where, you know, the lines of purity seem to be very rigid, right? I mean, especially this country, which came from a puritanical conception of what was right and good. And that is not necessarily reflected in many other cultures in the world. So, but we're influenced by that. So definitions of purity might be communal, but the concept of finding what defines purity and then standardizing that and enabling people to enter into it when they're disqualified from that, that's a very Jewish thing. That, I think, is a very important piece of this. And I would say, why? Because that enables you to ask the questions that will create the connection for deeper wisdom. So that's what I think this week's portion provides for us. I thought I would include that. So that's the first. I wrote this actually not so long ago. So this is like some of the last stuff that I just wrote. So good. I have a couple little things that I need to fix and correct here.
Writing for like sermons about unusual thoughts.
People were writing. So if you want to go look and find somebody who made the connection between what happened at the Oscars and the Torah reading, you can find it. Yeah. I personally wouldn't make the connection because I respect the dignity. I thought the whole situation was awful. It was awful. I get it. I get the anger. I get the joke. I get everything about it. The fact that it was broadcast live on TV for millions, you know, was tragic. But yeah.
Smith needs
Well,
Musar.
Yeah, right. You know, and I really think that it's.
I feel bad for him though.
For everyone in the story. Everyone in the story. It was a bad thing. And maybe we as a society can learn from the fact that these things happen. It wasn't inhuman, right? So here are these people that we put up on pedestals and say, you're supposed to be the best specimens of humanity. And you just reflected the worst example, right? Which, by the way, you usually do, right? And so all of a sudden, we're like saying, hey, even our best, our false beliefs in the best are human too. That could be a very helpful thing. I have to conclude for today. I hope how was it? Are you guys, good start? You ready to go? Good. So next week we'll do the questions around Passover and also move into a little bit about like why is Passover the quintessential holiday of seeking? So we'll use the text, the questions of the Torah themselves, which, by the way, there aren't very many about Passover, believe it or not, right?
4 questions.
4 to be exact. Almost. All right, everybody.
Are we gonna meet at Barbara's house again next week?
Yeah. So what are we doing? Barbara, are you willing to host next week? Judy, do you want to host next week?
I don't know. I might be doing Zoom for a while.
I can host.
Okay, great. So
I'd rather not do it next week because I do clean my
yeah.
kitchen.
So Pam, are you comfortable hosting?
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to get Pam. Pam's going to host. She lives in the area. We'll send her a message. It's in this area, right?
Yes.
So can you, where do you guys live? You guys live in Northridge, Canyon? Oh, okay, good. So you're close. Yeah.
So
Roberta?
do an
I won't be
address.
here next week.
Okay.
But I do have a question. If you're not going to be here sometime, do you send the link anyway to everybody?
Yes.
Everyone,
Yes.
all the time. So
I'm going to
we
do it.
can
I'm going to
make-
do it every week.
Okay.
Yeah.